So Julie is a Cluff, is that correct?
Cluff, yes.
Is an inspirational speaker, author, international grief coach, and a host of the popular Build a Life After Loss podcast. She's a founder of Build a Life After Loss and True Hope Leadership. She weaves principles of recovery and success throughout her presentations to inspire others to action. Julie and her fun-loving husband live in south of Salt Lake City. So
Yes.
she's coming all the way from Salt Lake City with their Maltipoo Scout. I imagine that's a dog.
Yes.
They have 6 beautiful children, including 2 angels and 10 incredible grandchildren, which is just the real reason to have children. Julie enthusiastically shares a message of hope across many platforms. So let's give a warm welcome to Julie Cluff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. Am I able to share my screen?
Yes, you are.
Okay, perfect. And you guys can see and hear me okay?
Oh, yes.
Awesome. This is great. Okay, let me share my screen and we'll get started. It's always a little slow. Okay, there we go. Let me just change this. All right, good. So Brian messaged this week and told me a little, just briefly, just mentioned some of the loss that you have experienced as a club recently, devastating loss. And of course, this past year and a half has been a series of losses for our communities, for ourselves individually, and in every way. It's just a series of losses. And so I kind of took a liberty and changed my typical topic to Rotary Club and thought I would speak a little bit specifically about grief, if that's okay. I often equate grief and loss to being thrown into the middle of a deep lake and you've never learned how to swim. I mean, how many of you can relate to that? It's just like you have no idea how to navigate and you're just kind of drowning in the middle of this lake. And if you've, I grew up in Florida, that's where I'm from. And I lived there for many, many years, lots of water. And I had occasion as a young person to experience that feeling of physically drowning. Like, I was in the lake and I was young. And for some reason, I knew how to swim, but for some reason I got pushed under at this one point. And I just remember that feeling of panic that I felt in that moment where I was just under this water and nobody seemed to realize that I was under. Of course, I'm here today, so the story ends well. But this is often how we feel emotionally when loss happens, when grief happens. And what I've discovered is that just like we can learn to swim in a lake, we can learn to navigate grief and get to the shore, and not get to any shore, but to get to swim to where we want to go, to get to where we want to go. And that's a little bit about what I want to share with you today. And you may be asking, why am I here? Why do I even talk about grief? And I just want to share a little piece about why I'm here. And that is, first of all, I lost my brother to suicide many years ago, 20 years ago. And then not long after that, I went through a divorce from my first husband, since remarried, the fun-loving husband that Brian mentioned. Many years ago, we married and I came to the marriage with 3 children, and my husband and I, my current husband and I, had 3 more children. And when our youngest 2 were 8 and 10, we were in a car accident. I was driving the car. I had my 3 youngest children with me. My son, James, who was 12, was sitting next to me. Carrie and David were in the back seat, and we were in a rollover accident in our SUV. And unfortunately, Carrie and David were thrown from the car and they didn't survive the accident. And These losses, as well as so many others, is what brings me here today talking about grief. It's why I do what I do, because there's too many people in the world believing that they have to stay in the middle of that lake drowning. And if you hear nothing else today, it's that grief is part of the process. Grief is associated with loss. It's the normal, it's the natural reaction to loss, but we don't have to stay there. And that no matter what the loss, we can regain our footing, we can regain our confidence. You know, I loved what Avi said about confidence and how, you know, kind of lost our confidence in crowds and people and being, I was so excited 2 weeks ago, I gave a live presentation. I had all these live presentations on my books when everything closed down last year. And I was actually able to be in a room with people, but it's also unnerving too, because, you know, we haven't been live for a while. But no matter what the loss, we can regain our confidence. We can regain our joy in life. We can regain our purpose. And I just want to share, this was a picture. The accident where my children died was on Mother's Day in 2007. This was the anniversary. This was right around 3 years after the accident. My husband had a trip to London, and business trip, and he took me with him. Now, he didn't take me with him because he thought it would be a fun vacation. He took me with him because I was doing so poorly that he was worried to leave me at home. And when this past January, had some pictures taken, and I just happened across, it gets me emotional talking about it because I remember being in this really, really hard place. And when I saw these pictures next to each other, it was like a physical representation of healing. And I'm so, so grateful that I found answers, that I experienced healing. And that's what I offer. That's what I offer to teach people. These are my children, Carrie on the left and David on the right, with their sister Stephanie in the middle. Carrie and David. Carrie was 10 when she died, and David was 8, and this was taken the month before they passed away. But, oh, and I wrote a book, Miracles in the Darkness, about my experience of losing my children. But I want to share with you a little bit about grief, because this is kind of what grief feels like. It's like this boulder, it just lands on us. It's heavy, it's unexpected. Even when it's expected, it's unexpected, isn't it? Even when we anticipate a loss, when it actually happens, there's a whole nother level of grief that happens. This comes from the death, it comes from stillbirth, it comes from miscarriage, divorce, breakup, estrangement, abuse, health crisis, career crisis. People have lost businesses because of shutdowns. There's so much loss in the world. This is what we experience. And so it's really important that we learn about grief and that we don't find ourselves in the middle of that deep lake, because we do need to learn skills around grief and recovery. But this is what it feels like, doesn't it? It's like we use the words crushed, devastated, distressed, shattered, shocked, overwhelmed, distraught. Those are the words that we use. There's a reason we use those words. And that boulder of grief just settles into us, and we're in this space of low vibration, low energy, low feelings. And it's very, very hard to bring ourselves from there to where we want, you know, where we don't want to feel that, but that's our normal and natural reaction. And when we have multiple losses, it's as if those boulders just keep stacking up on top of each other. And we get to the point where we just don't feel good. You know, it even covers, you can see this visually, like it covers our throat, it covers our ability to think and to talk and to share. And what it feels like when we go, we kind of plunged into this place of coping, and we want to get over here to rebuilding where we feel whole and healthy and vibrant again. But how do we get there? Because when we step off of coping, it's like there's no path. There's no path from there to there. And so what we do is we go from coping to, oh, I need to rebuild. I need to, pick myself up by the bootstraps and get on with life. And we try to move on with life, but we're carrying that boulder with us, and there's not a good path. And so we try to jump over to rebuilding, and it doesn't work. So we go back. And we do that. If we do that enough times, we think there is no path. It is not possible. This is as good as it gets. And that's what we find that people will get into a place of despair. Grief is in this space between understanding and healing and despair. And we want to be in a place of healing and health. And so it is a challenge. This is the challenge of grief. We hear things like, you have to learn to carry it. Just keep yourself busy. It will always be with you. You will grieve forever. And we don't always hear those messages with every type of loss, but there are certain losses where we hear messages like, you just got to figure out how to carry it. It's just going to grieve forever. And then there are other losses where it's just like, well, if you just keep busy, then you won't have to deal with the grief. And those messages are unhelpful. So what do we do? And here I show like this, the challenge of grief is in this place between transformation and the abyss of despair. And so what is going to bring us to transformation instead of despair? And what brings us forward is hope and courage, and where we can find peace and transformation. Grief is normal. It is the place that you find yourself. It's the crossroad between despair and healing. Grief is intended to support healing, but it's so dangerously close to despair. And the choices we make while in grief matter. That's why it matters so, so much. Despair drains us from all that is vibrant and joyful and leaves behind the empty remnants of what life was meant to be. Despair can seem like a staircase that leads only and forever downward, whereas hope is like the beam of sunlight rising up and above the horizon of our present circumstances. It pierces the darkness with a brilliant dawn. So choices. And we say, I didn't choose my current circumstances. I didn't choose this loss. I didn't choose to grieve. So what choices do I have? And is there hope for me? That's probably in different forms the question that I get asked the most, and the question that I love to get asked the most, because I truly believe there is hope. Always, always, always hope for rebuilding and regaining our vibrancy for life. So what is our choice? Because Viktor Frankl said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And that is the key to growth after grief. I can choose hope. We can choose love. We can choose to grow and change. So the model of healing, and this is the hope model of healing that bridges this gap between coping and rebuilding. Now, maybe you have seen a model of grief that looks something like, where a grief in the beginning just is so overwhelming. But as we as a person have new experiences, we grow around that grief. And so that particular model of grief, what it shows us is that, what it illustrates is that the grief doesn't really leave, that we just grow around it and we become not obviously, I'm never going to get taller, but we become more able to carry our grief. But the hope model of healing that I offer is that we do have new experiences. We do grow around our grief and that sadness that we feel. And that when we go through that grief, that growth process, that then we're able to resolve and heal that grief that we carry so that we don't carry it for a lifetime. It is a process so that we create a pathway between coping and rebuilding. And that is the way that we go from coping to rebuilding, is that we're missing some of the steps in the middle. So the hope model of healing is that we honor our grief, that we open to understanding, to really understanding grief, what it is, what it isn't, how we can cope, and how we can understand the process, that we prepare through discovery. You know that big boulder of grief that I showed? If you've ever been hiking and you tried to move a large boulder out of your path, you know how impossible that is. And that's a lot of times how we view grief. Like, this thing happened, like I went through a divorce, that's this boulder, and we're trying to move the whole boulder. Or, my child died, or I lost my career, I lost my business. It's just this huge thing that we're trying to move all at once. But through the discovery process, we learn that that boulder is not just one big thing. It's actually a collection of rocks and pebbles and sand. And we move those pieces one by one instead of feeling like we have to move it all at once. Much more manageable. And then we embrace resolution and rebuilding. Hope offers a pathway to healing. It leads to transformation. If you've ever heard of a post-traumatic stress disorder, that's what I experienced after the accident. And through specialized therapy, I was able to overcome my PTSD. But there's also a thing called post-traumatic growth. And it's almost as if they view post-traumatic growth as you either accidentally stumble across it or you don't, and you're left, with this situation, this pain that you don't want to carry, but the loss isn't going to go away. So then you start thinking there's no way to lift the pain of it. And my belief is that post-traumatic growth is available to everyone, and that through a process of steps and healing, we can all experience post-traumatic growth. So what are some of the things that we can do in the process, in our now, in our moments when we experience disappointment, when we experience sadness, when we experience grief? So the first thing is to keep hope alive. Listen to messages that bring you hope and inspire you. Turn off messages that say that it's not possible, that you can't heal. Allow your emotions. This is super hard because we all live in this world that just wants to, we just want to embrace positivity to the point that we exclude other emotions. But it's necessary for us to allow our emotions and seek support. Our support needs to be equal or greater than our challenge. If you think about being put in the middle of a lake and not being able to swim, obviously you're going to want somebody to come by with a boat or who can teach you how to swim or has a life vest or something. So just remembering that it's not weakness to seek support, it's strength to seek support for the challenges that you face. Albert Einstein said we can't solve a problem with the same thinking we used when we created the problem. Now, we don't create the problem of grief, but I think the same thing applies, is that we can't solve the problem that we're experiencing. We can't solve grief from the same level of understanding that we currently have until we elevate our growth, elevate our understanding. And that's when we gain that strength to heal our heart. So I wanted to talk for just 1 minute about supporting others, because it's important that we, when we go through loss, a lot of that loss is experienced by many, many people. If you're at the epicenter, you're at the beginning of that loss, if you're in the middle of that loss, you are probably not going to have the strength really to support others. You're going to want to, but you're in need of that support. But then as we move out, we deal with our own feelings about what's been lost, but then we also deal with wanting to support others in that loss. So I just wanted to offer 3 quick ideas for supporting others. One is to show up, and whatever that looks like. If it's a casual relationship, maybe it's just sending a card or picking up the phone and saying, I'm so sorry, or, but not feeling like you have to say the right thing. Trying to say just the right thing sometimes is what gets us into trouble, but just expressing your sorrow for their loss. If it's a deeper relationship, we hear that we need to grieve alone and that we just leave people alone and let them deal with it. But in reality, people need people to show up in whatever way that makes sense for you and for the relationship. Listen. Listening is key. Just listen and remember that they're going through a really difficult time. So the things that they say may not make sense. And you may really have this urge to talk them out of what they're thinking and feeling and saying. And it's not necessary to talk them out of it. Really what they need is just to be able to express themselves so that they can move through. And don't try to fix it. This gets us into big trouble too, is because we try to fix it and we can't fix it. But showing up is so key. That compassion is so healing. And just coming with compassion is huge. I just want to encourage each of you as you consider your own experiences with loss and grief and the experiences that you're having in your community and your experience as a leader in your community. As a Rotarian, you are a leader, you are providing service, you are providing that compassion, you are providing that support. And so I just want to encourage you in your work that you do, because I'm a huge fan. And I am available. I know that we're right on time, but if you have a moment for questions, I am totally open for questions.
Okay. Is there any questions?
Is the book out now, or is it available?
Yes, it is. It's on Amazon or anywhere where you get books.
Anybody else have questions?
What was the name of the book again?
It's Miracles in the Darkness. You can look it up under my name too, Julie Cluff. And there's a link on my website, buildalifeafterloss.com, where you can read the first chapter. And it has a link to the.
I'll include it in the replay. Hopefully all you guys read it. Okay. I really appreciate what you said about what do you say to somebody when they had a loss, because I feel uncomfortable and I now I have kind of idea of just say what you feel. So thank you very much. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, Julie.
Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. And Bill left, I guess, but she's great. Thank you all. for coming on Zoom. We did our second hybrid meeting. We still got a lot to work on. Get a little more efficient. So I guess that's it. You want to ring the bell, Paul? Good. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you all. You know,